So the City of Holland a number of years ago adopted a sustainability framework. And so it's quality of life, smart energy, community and neighborhood, community knowledge, economic development, environmental awareness and action, and transportation. So it's these 7 areas that is how we kind of frame how we're doing as a city in terms of sustainability. A lot of times when people think of sustainability, they just automatically go right to environmental or energy or transportation as some of those key areas. But really we're looking at it a more holistic picture, this triple bottom line. How are we doing as a community to encourage quality of life of everyone in our community? What are we doing in terms of building relationships with people in our community? How are we doing economically? And educating our future generations as well. So it's all of these things that really help make a sustainable, more resilient community. And so with this, we've adopted this sustainability framework to put out our monthly series through Living Sustainably along the Lakeshore. And so obviously tonight we're going to be talking about economic development in regards to sustainability. But then this framework, we also utilize it for our annual dashboard sustainability report. And so we put out a lot of different metrics along those lines. And then also our newspaper series in the Holland Sentinel follows along with this framework as well. So again, we're just trying to further this idea of what sustainability means for an actual community. And so with that, I'm going to be inviting Ken Freestone up here to help launch us for tonight's event, Economic Sustainability. So as we all know, economics is one of the 3 critical elements supporting that triple bottom line. And so we're going to be exploring some of these different areas tonight. So I'll introduce Ken Freestone from greenmichigan.org, and he will introduce all of our speakers.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all here. I just got a text message just came through just a few moments ago that talked about, so we had a little meeting yesterday in Saugatuck with somebody from Saugatuck, Douglas, Saugatuck Township about recycling and composting, and we're actually probably going to be hosting a composting and recycling workshop and conference for this area. So the greater Holland area, Zeeland, Saugatuck, maybe down to South Haven too, in Saugatuck, probably at the very end of April, the last week of April. We decided to do it after Earth Day, since there's a few people are kind of busy leading up to Earth Day. So this just came through, so we haven't set the exact date yet. We're looking just finalizing a location, hopefully Saugatuck High School, but it looks like the last week of April. So that's one that there's been a lot of conversation about that, and it's a huge economic impact, both to us as a community and individuals, but also to the vendors and the suppliers and the processors and the recyclers. And so there's a huge economic impact there. And tonight we'll hear a little bit about some of that recycling impact. So this will be a really big topic for all of us as we all transition new recycling methods and techniques and systems in the Holland area. So again, I'm Ken Freestone. I'm the residential energy advisor for the City of Holland, so I help with the home energy retrofit program, but I'm also one of the co-founders of greenmichigan.org. We're a resource center and a nonprofit working with organizations and individuals on sustainability. And so this fits into my conversation every day, the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. So we've got 3 speakers this evening, and our first speaker is Carla Maslink, and I'll give a little bio of Carla. I've known Carla a long time, and my relationship with Carla and Bruce have been really on the engagement of nonprofits in the community and their giving to the nonprofits and also their assistance to the nonprofits and supporting them. So really appreciate all that you both do in the community. But Carla is, so with more than 24 years of experience in the investment industry, Carla is a highly regarded member of the financial community in Holland. She's a certified financial planner professional. Carla possesses expertise that encompasses a wide range of financial solutions and wealth management strategies. She is committed to understanding the individual needs and circumstances of her clients and creating personalized investment strategies for them, a dedication that sets her apart. And it truly does. She's a graduate of Hope College, and Carla continues also to be a really active member in the community with various charitable boards and nonprofits, and also including the Holland Zeeland Community Foundation. Also, one of the things that I really appreciate about Carla is her broad thinking. I know that when we came to Carla personally and talked about some of these investment strategies to something a little different. Can we not do the same thing that we've always done? Can we try something a little differently? I know I challenged you, you challenged me back, and so it's nice to have someone who's willing to take those challenges and say, can we invest a little differently Maybe it'll make as much return, maybe it won't, but I know that I will feel much better about my investments knowing that I've got them in the right places. So with that, Carla Massling from Raymond James.
Thank you, Ken. So thank you all for coming, and welcome to the panel discussion on living sustainably. I think I need to update my internet. I've now been in the business, the financial business, 37 years. Don't add. But in any case, nice to be here and nice to have you all with us. What is sustainable investment? Because I'm in the investment business, I've kind of categorized and broken it down to try to give you a structure. We need first to look at traditional investing. What is the way it used to be done? And traditional investing is just simply investing with the expectation of generating a return that's greater than taxes and inflation. And sometimes to exceed a benchmark, sometimes just to be even with a benchmark. So then we get into the environmental, the social, and the governance investing, and it's much the same. It's to invest with the expectation of generating a return greater than taxes and inflation, and achieving something that is in the investor's mind. So it evaluates markets, public markets, private markets, as to the holdings and if they uphold these ESG, environmental, social, and governance tenets. Impacting investing as well focuses on making positive environmental and social changes in companies. So sustainable investing, kind of a history of where we were and where we're going. So the old type of socially conscious investments meant that you tried to avoid what we call the sin companies. Guess what they are? Casinos, tobacco, alcohol. So that we had for many years, a couple decades, I think. It's kind of a negative screening, and the primary focus is those sin stocks. Every once in a while you'll hear there's an exchange-traded fund that either invests in them and does great or doesn't invest in them, depending on how much people like to drink when the economy's bad. So that goes hand in hand with what's happening. Second, what we have now is an emphasis on ESG, where investors invest in projects, companies, mutual funds, industries, and countries with positive ESG tenets and look to improve financial performance. Then it's a positive screening. It's a filtering to look for companies that are best in class, that have positive themes, positive values, and the investor does well by doing good. So that's key. We all want that. Third, engagement. This is another step forward where the investor steps up to address policies and practices to improve a company's projects, products, policies, and it's a commitment to improve the positive ESG values that may already exist or to implement them. And how is that done? It's done by direct communication. It's done by exercising shareholder rights. It's done by attending shareholder meetings and stepping up to voice your concerns. So ESG, initials. We always need to define initials. So environmental, climate change, carbon emission, waste, pollution, energy efficiency, water conservation are some of the themes. Social, what we have here are human rights, diversity, inclusion, workplace safety, labor relations, privacy, data security, lots of new things popping up all the time. Governance, the third of the ESG, shareholder rights, anti-corruption measures, board accountability, compensation structures, business ethics, diverse board of directors. That's a big one lately. So responsible investing is growing at a compounding rate. It was once thought of as a strategy limited to investors concerned with corporate responsibility. Now, responsible investing is made up of a variety of investment approaches, and these range from value-driven strategies to those focused on financial outcomes, such as income generation, wealth creation, and also capital preservation through bonds. So we see impact investing to intentionally generate positive social and environmental outcomes. We also often have it called thematic. And so those are some of the same. We have the themes that some people carry on. And integrated is another word that's often used. So it blends the ESG considerations with the fundamental factors to look at a company's positive, what would we say? Sales, earnings, PE, and various things, dividends. So who and what is driving this responsible investing? So changing demographics. Number one is millennials. They prefer to invest to align with their goals and their personal values. These are people ages 22 to 37. And studies have shown that 67% of these millennials believe that they want to invest the way they believe and to further their values. This is in comparison to the baby boomers, those people born between 1946 and 1964. Statistics have shown 36% of them are interested. So there are also, this is interesting to keep in mind, 90 million millennials who stand to inherit a great deal of money. In fact, over 30 trillion, and they are interested in responsible investing. Second, women. And studies show that 75% of women are interested in the responsible or sustainable investing. They want to know that their investments affect corporate behavior, and they want to invest where they are making a difference, helping to solve social and environmental changes. There are 1.35 billion women worldwide in the workplace, and it's estimated that another 1 billion will join the workplace in the next decade. So women with money will be making decisions. And in addition, private wealth held by women has grown from 34 trillion to 51 trillion. And that the figures are a little bit dated, so possibly even more. Third, 80% of high net worth investors believe in sustainable investing, and they take responsibility for the impact of environment and society. Then 80% of the world's corporations now are following the Global Reporting Initiative standards. And this is an international independent standards organization that helps businesses, governments, and other organizations understand and communicate the impact of the activities, products, and services with the framework so they can follow it. Climate change is the #1 concern for investors in 2019. So investors fall into 3 categories. First, it's the avoid. Avoid the companies that are not doing well, that don't align with their values. Second, emphasize. Invest in the companies, funds, industries that are already aligned with their values. And third, engage. and they look to improve what a company's doing by getting into the shareholders' rights, the proxies, various things, the meetings. The United Nations also has developed 17 sustainable goals, and altogether they target 169 possible outcomes. So it's a pretty complicated, large, diverse universe of what's happening. The number one outcome is people. And this, the United Nations has it broken down into 5. Number 1 is people, and that focuses on ending poverty and hunger by promoting health, equality, and education. Number 2, planet, protecting the earth. 3, prosperity, and this outcome works to have lives of people be fulfilling. Number 4, peace, focuses on peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. And last, partnership, so the participation of countries, shareholders, people achieving these goals. Myths, there have been a lot of myths in the past. One is that sustainable investing is a fad. Second, it hurts financial performance. And third, the environment and society do not affect investors. Facts, reality, it is the future of investing. Investors of all types and kinds are increasingly interested in ESG investing, especially the millennials, the Generation X, who are born between 1965 and 1980, in case any people want to put themselves into a category, and women, also older investors, corporations, and people who organize charities and philanthropy. Third, it does enhance performance. It has less volatility because the companies are better managing their risk. Climate change and social unrest does affect investors. Global youth unemployment, apartheid, global unrest, they all cause volatile markets. Examples, apartheid. Investors stopped investing in South Africa, and the laws were changed to end apartheid. Volkswagen and Facebook. Volkswagen, they were recently in the news, and false information about emissions caused their stock to fall by 25% in one day. Facebook stock fell by $120 billion in July of 2018 following a data privacy scandal. So companies are increasingly looking to have sustainable procedures that align with fiduciary duties. That lowers business risk, it increases employee satisfaction, and the companies are looking at human rights, community relations, customer welfare, green gas emissions, water, waste management. And the last item I have is green bonds. So we've looked at equity, we've looked at stocks, we've looked at mutual funds that have stocks. We also have fixed income investments, and these are bonds traded at usually $1,000 each with a guarantee of principal, guarantee of interest. And we now have green bonds. And as the economy shifts to low carbon footprints, portfolios have reduced the carbon exposure, we think will outperform the market. So a green bond, standard instrument, just as a regular bond, is intended and put into effect to help solar projects, clean water, to lessen pollution, to promote sustainable energy, and even to bring energy to remote areas. So in 2015, 195 countries have signed on to the initiative to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and lower global temperatures by 2 degrees Celsius, which is more than Fahrenheit. So these sustainable projects are increasing in number. So why consider it? It's because it's also better investing. And second, it is our future. So there are ETFs, exchange-traded funds, that are passive instruments for investing. There are active instruments for investing, such as mutual funds. I'll name a couple: Dana, Parnassus, Domini, Calvert. And there are separately managed accounts. So there's a lot of different ways today that a person can invest sustainably and help the world. Thank you.
Do you have any questions right now you'd like to ask Carl? We can split this up a little bit instead of doing all of them at the end. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask now? Great, well, then we'll save those for the end. And great, Carla, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Heidi, I think you're going to be next. Well, Bill, are you ready to end everything with the big tap dance and the big through? Okay. You got your costume? Okay, that's good. All right. Now, I just met Heidi tonight, and Bill got a recommendation from Bill to have Heidi speak. And it's really interesting. We started with Bill talking about recycling and then looking at the corporate structure, and we switched it out, and Heidi's actually going to talk about recycling in a corporate structure. And so Heidi's with Steelcase. She's worked in the environmental industry for over 13 years. She spent 9 years working on environmental remediation and cleanup efforts, including work for the Department of Energy and the Enbridge oil spill right here in Michigan. Heidi also spent a year as a certified external environmental auditor and now works for Steelcase. Heidi's been with Steelcase for over 3 years and is committed to keeping materials at their highest value stream for as long as possible. She also serves on the board of directors for the West Michigan Environmental Action Council and is active in the environmental advocacy community. So Heidi Frazier from Steelcase, and come on up. Are we all? Is this yours?
I think I just have to minus out and then I'll find mine.
No.
The really colorful one.
All right. Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I used to live in Holland for about 4 years, and now I just bought a home, my first home, on the Lakeshore. And we're pretty excited because we have about a 10-year plan before we have Lake Michigan property. It's not a funny joke. So I work at Steelcase, as I was introduced. But Steelcase was founded in 1912 as a metal office furniture company. And they're located in Grand Rapids, which makes us over 100 years old. And there's a little video that I'll share because they do a much better job of describing Steelcase than I could. So I thought I would share that. I'm sorry to any Herman Miller folks in the room.
It started with a fire. In 1912, we saw a problem. Wooden buildings, lots of paper, people smoking. Fire was just a swamp away. So we designed a metal wastebasket that wouldn't burn. It may seem like a simple idea now, but that's what innovation looks like. Solving a problem by doing things in new ways. Over 4,000 patents later, we've learned a lot, and it's made us who we are today. We're makers.
I'll just exit out of that. We'll go back to the presentation and just go from there.
We'll go from there? Okay.
Yeah, it's easier. So I'll introduce that Steelcase then. So it's a metal office furniture company, but we make much more than just metal furniture now. We've evolved, and as our products evolved, so has our waste. So you can kind of see from the picture we make a lot more than just chairs, but I wanted to kind of depict how our products have changed over the years. You can see the first image was one of our chairs from 1950s, and there's a lot more metal in that chair, and so the economics of recycling that chair is a lot higher than we have currently with plastics in the 2000s. So a little history. Economically, recycling was very easy for Steelcase. In fact, it actually made sense to recycle from an economic perspective because we were getting more money by recycling than we would have by landfilling some of these materials. We were actually getting at one point $95 a ton for a bale of cardboard, so why wouldn't you bale it and recycle it? We were getting money for foam noodles, banding, shrink wrap, loose, not even baled. You name it, we were getting paid for it. And not a lot, but it was better than landfilling because obviously you're paying for that disposal and then the life cycle of that is not great. So the economics were really great. You know, as most of you are aware, maybe not, the markets have changed significantly for recycling. In 2018, China banned the import of recycled materials, and unfortunately, the US was relying very heavily upon exporting our recyclable commodities to China. It made sense. We were getting a lot of materials from China, and rather than sending back empty cargo vessels, we would fill up those vessels with our recycled commodities, baled commodities, send it over to China, and they had markets for these materials. Not great markets. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the, there's a documentary, I think it's called Plastic China, and it kind of, I think, is what set the new policy in motion, which was called the National Sword. So in 2018, China said no more, and that has really impacted the US market. So we went from $95 a ton for a bale of cardboard to -20, pretty much overnight. So all the paper industries have kind of slowed down. Everything from steel, everything has kind of taken a tumble. So overnight we went from it being economic for industries to recycle to no longer being economic. So we've kind of had to scramble, and this is probably a hard image to read, but the overall message here that I wanted to portray is that we were sending everything to China, and ultimately they looked for new markets. And unfortunately in those new markets, you can see a lot of them, Malaysia, Vietnam, India, Taiwan, they don't have the infrastructure set up that China did, and China didn't even have great infrastructure. So a lot of these commodities are now actually ending up as pollution in oceans and rivers and land, and I think no one is probably a stranger to the ocean plastics issue that we're seeing, and this is only going to exacerbate that issue. The other thing too to keep in mind from a climate change perspective is that methane emissions from landfill are 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide in a 20-year lifespan. So it's a lot more impactful from a climate change perspective. So for Steelcase, just some pictures of some commodities that were easily recyclable that are no longer recyclable. And so we had to kind of pick some focus areas. Again, this happened literally to us at 5 p.m. on a Friday. And so it was a scramble to figure out, what do we focus on? We all of a sudden can't recycle all of these commodities that should be easily recyclable, including water bottles, which is crazy. So we had to pick some focus areas, and how we decided to do that was to just kind of focus on what can we get money for, what is still economically recyclable. So then what we can do is we can take the money that we're making from that material and offset some of these other commodities that we know have no value, like plastic water bottles. So we focused on some of those commodities, and the first one was shrink wrap. We had a really good relationship built up through actually conferences and just networking events like this. We built up a relationship with Trex Decking, and they were willing to take our plastic wrap if we were able to bale it, which was a feat unto itself, and then give us a value for it. It's not much, but it's enough to kind of offset the baling practices and the actual physical labor that goes into that. And so this product now is going as waste baled to Trex Decking, who then uses it as a feedstock material for their decking products, which some of you actually might have. It's really nice stuff. So instead of having to go get virgin plastic, they are actually using our waste as their feedstock. So it's kind of closing that loop in a circular economy. And that's something that at Steelcase we're constantly focusing on. And I think you heard in the introduction, my job is to constantly look for opportunities like this. looking for materials at their highest value stream to keep them at their highest value stream as long as possible. The economics on this is actually pretty good. We made about $20,000 a year in cost savings just by doing this. So it made sense. And then that, like I said, offset some other projects that we are still kind of working on. Cardboard process. So cardboard, like I said, it went from a 95 a ton in about 2016, 2017 to negative 20 in 2018. So what we found is if we bypassed the recycling company that we were going through and went direct to the paper mill, we could get more money for that. So a lot of it was just educating ourselves on some of these things. And so what we ended up doing, again, was no small feat to get them to bale all of our cardboard. Anyone who's ever worked in manufacturing knows how hard it is to get floor space and how hard it is to get people to change processes. Those two things are not easy to do. But we were able to do that within a month, where we got everything baled, and then those bales are going direct to the paper mill, and it's a local paper mill, so it's kind of a not such a bad carbon footprint story. And then we actually do get value back for these bales, and they actually give us a premium because, again, this paper mill in particular is looking for that material as a feedstock so that they can make 100% recycled corrugated products. And then we, as Steelcase, purchase back that 100% recycled corrugated products to use in our packaging. So again, it's that closed loop. Not only does it make an economic sense, it also makes environmental sense. And I think that is a great point to make, that it's not always a bad story economically to recycle. Sometimes it does make sense. You just have to be really creative and innovative on how you approach it. We also are pushing back on our supply chain, just like customers are asking us questions daily on our sustainability story, and investors are constantly asking us about our sustainability story and are rating us against ESG. We are pushing back on our supply chains. We're asking them, please don't send us black banding, yellow banding, because those things are not recyclable. We can only recycle green translucent banding. That's crazy, but that's where we're at. Please don't send us these foam noodles, for example. They're actually coming from a supplier here in Holland, and they're sending them in these big blue bags. Why? They could wrap it in hemp, or even a zip tie would be much better solution to that packaging. So pushing back on our incoming suppliers. We're also working with a lot of local suppliers on returnable tote processes. So basically what that means is we're getting their materials in a plastic tote. Automotive company does this a lot of times. And then we give them back that tote. They replenish the supplies in that tote, and we get it back, so it's this closed loop packaging process. And it really cuts down on the amount of waste that we have coming in on our plant floor. And then a huge change that we made recently was changing recycling companies. We had been with our previous recycler for 70 years, so again, no small feat to change, but we had found that the economics weren't making sense with that recycling company, and our material and our waste streams have changed. Like I said, our product offering has changed. It's no longer heavily metal products. We have a lot more plastic in our materials. And so we need someone who can process plastics and who can find markets for those plastics, and preferably local markets, so that we're making less of an impact. And then we also were looking at closed loop solutions for our products. So how can we work with a local recycler to potentially put some of our waste back into our products? So we're closing that loop for our own products. And we're looking at all sorts of different projects now where they are able to recycle our banding for us if we just tie it in these little bundles. And they also have an outlet for our water bottles where they're actually getting put back in as filler for foam materials in automotive companies. So again, looking for all of those upcycling solutions and those circular economy solutions. We also have a ton of partnerships and donation opportunities that we look for. We donate a lot of fabric. I think we had, I'm gonna say 20 tons of fabric donated last year to organizations like Public Thread, who, the picture up at the top there, it's a bag that Janae is making, her company, Public Thread, is making out of our scrap material. And again, we purchase back those products and we give them to our customers as customer visit gifts. So we're trying to kind of work with our community partners. Janae hires all women, but also refugee women who have a hard time finding work. and puts them to work. And so we're helping our community, but we're also trying to close that loop on our waste. We also donate to WIMCAT, and they use a lot of our fabrics for the fashion design program. And then more recently, we donated to Art Prize Project One, and they used our fabric in it was on the tunnel in Grand Rapids. I don't know if any of you guys saw that, but she basically wrapped the tunnel with some of our scrap fabric, and a lot of Steelcase employees actually went and helped her sew that project too. So there was some actual physical volunteers as well. But we're constantly looking for these solutions because that social part of ESG is very important to us as well. We're always exploring, and I work really closely with Bill and his group, and actually work really closely with Herman Miller and Hayworth as well, because none of us are competing against who can put more materials in the landfill. And I think that's kind of the coolest part about my job is I don't have to compete with my competitors. We get to work together arm in arm to try to find solutions to problems that we all have. And we're looking at composting opportunities. How do we take our veneer waste, which is actually a really beautiful waste, and potentially turn that back into compost. And Bill's group is doing a lot of work around that. We're also looking at closed loop take back programs, so working with organizations like BIFMA to try to potentially find solutions for our packaging materials, and we're looking at a potential closed loop process there. Also reducing plastics in our packaging. So what are we doing to our customers that we're pushing back on our suppliers, right? Like, how do we make a difference for our customers as well? And then working on, again, like I said, other collaboratives with other furniture manufacturers to explore waste reduction, recycling, composting, and how do we divert more materials from the landfill. I love this quote because I think it explains my day-to-day. I get a lot of no's, so I stand on a mountain of no's for one, yes, and I think that's kind of the key takeaway here is we can't give up. We obviously have to do what's right, and even when it becomes economically difficult, that doesn't mean you stop. You can always find those nuggets of win-wins where it's the right thing to do, but it's also going to make economic sense. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. That was great. So Bill Stow is our next speaker, and Bill Stow and I have had a chance to work together a number of times over the years through the West Michigan Strategic Alliance and a number of trails activities I did throughout the years, and West Michigan Environmental Action Council, the West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, so there's been a lot of opportunity to work together with Bill. Recently, Bill has been helping the city of Holland with they have the Materials Management Task Force over the last 18 months. And we've been analyzing our waste stream and our recycling system. And Bill has done a great job of taking that data and condensing it and compressing it and consolidating it and getting us out a good report on what we can do next. And it was good to get the data, but it was good to have somebody help us put that data together. So Bill, thank you for your work with the city. Bill's with Sustainable Research Group, and it's a limited liability company, and Bill is the chief executive officer. He's been there. Bill has been over 30 years. It's more than that, isn't it?
20 years.
Yeah, 20. 20? Oh, okay, I thought it was 3. You know, you've done such great work. It just seems like that. Yeah. So Bill is experienced in providing technical assistance in the fields of environmentally sustainable business initiatives, industrial ecology, pollution prevention, and ISO 14001 environmental management systems. So Bill, again, has been a big part of a lot of the sustainability initiatives in West Michigan, and I really appreciate you coming tonight and kind of switching out the presentations a little bit and talking about the economics of investment.
Yeah, thanks, Ken, very much. It's really a pleasure to be here and see a lot of faces that I've known for a while in the audience, so that's great too. If my talk doesn't go long enough, I've been told by Ken that he's going to play the ukulele for us, so we get to hear his.
Have you ever heard me?
So I was asked to talk about the how do businesses invest in recycling? And you know, I started doing research on this. And what is the methodology that a business would go through to figure out how to invest in recycling? And I couldn't find anything. There's nothing out there. No one knows. And I think the reason for that is there are a myriad different reasons. Every business is a little bit different. Every business has a different approach. However, I think that I've been able to identify some kind of common trends that if you're looking for a business, and you might apply this to your own personal life too, I mean, I think it would apply just as well. How would you assess a business on how they were doing on recycling? So the first thing I would look for is, do you have a goal or a policy or a standard operating procedure? So if you do, you will probably have a recycling program. So first thing to ask, a lot of companies don't have recycling programs of any kind. It's amazing when you go out and start looking, it's not that important. But if a company has taken the time to develop a policy or a procedure or have a standard operating procedure, they typically will have a recycling program, and that mostly at the very basic level will entail having collection containers in the office. And if they're really lucky, they'll have them out in this plant too, if they're a manufacturing operation. If they go one step further, they may have a waste reduction goal. And waste reduction goal is one step above just recycling. So they're saying, we're going to try to reduce the amount of waste at the source. And if they have that, they will start looking, as Heidi has said in her presentation, back both up and down the supply chain. Who brings waste into your organization? So if you're a homeowner, it's you, because you go out and you buy things. If you're a business, it's typically your suppliers or your purchasing agents will purchase something with maybe not any kind of idea that they're contributing to the waste that Heidi has to deal with on the manufacturing side of it. So typically you will ask your suppliers, what are your policies on recycling? Do you have a waste reduction initiative going? How do you make decisions on how to get the products I'm buying from you to me, both protected, but at the same time not generating mountains of waste that I have to deal with? So if you're a homeowner, that's typically, and we saw this in the city of Holland when we were doing the waste characterization study, the vast majority of the waste that ends up going to the landfill is plastic waste of one kind or another. The food containers, the multi-layer materials that have paper and plastic, they're not recyclable for the most part. So they end up not being taken at the material recovery facility, and they end up as the component that goes to the landfill. It's the same way with a business. The next step above waste reduction would be to have a zero waste aspirational goal. And in this respect, you would have all of the things that I said before, working with your supply chain and so forth, but you take the extra step to develop partnerships like Public Thread that Steelcase uses. Herman Miller has a great partnership with Goodwill. And I know some of the other furniture manufacturers use some of the programs here in town that offer jobs to the disabled. So those kind of partnerships work at helping reach those zero waste goals. The next thing that a business would do if they were going to invest in recycling is invest in people. So first thing would be, if you have collection containers at each workstation, what goes in it and what doesn't go in it. So you need to educate staff. This is in the city of Holland. You're lucky that you have a material recycling facility that handles most of the waste. They have a list of things that are acceptable and things that are contaminants. So educating those folks as to what goes into the recycling bins and what shouldn't. Then the education of stakeholders. And stakeholders is a word that came out of the ESG arena, and it basically is a alternative to shareholder. So think of a stakeholder as anyone that has a material interest in a company. So anyone think of any stakeholders that might have a material interest in the company? Like environmental agencies, the government, employees, customers. So one of the things that companies will do is to reach out to their stakeholders and say, what are your expectations for our business to be successful in the waste reduction area? And they will get feedback from these folks, and companies that are investing in people will take that stakeholder input and turn that into actionable programs. If you're a small business and you're trying to set up a recycling program, maybe there are some small businesses out there, I'm sure there are. The number one barrier that you typically find in having an effective in-house recycling program, maintenance staff. So you may have a great collection system, you go out and you invest in collection containers, you've got everything set up under the desk, and it's all dependent on the maintenance staff coming at the end of the night, whoever is outsourced to clean the offices. They just dump everything in a trash container, they don't worry about it, no one knows, big deal. So a lot of times companies forget they have to train the entire supply chain. That includes contractors that come into the company and help them out. So educating the community. So participating in community events, letting the community know that the company is a resource, that it does do outreach and education programs. And many of the companies in this area will go out like tonight and talk to community events, share with them the successes and the failures that they have, and seek input as to how they can offer a better product or service to the community as well. The last thing, and this is what most people would think of as really investing, is the actual infrastructure for recycling. If you're a rudimentary start-out company, you're investing in collection containers, the recycling can, the trash can, labeling those. If you're the next step up in more of a waste reduction approach, you would actually put those same kind of initiatives out into the manufacturing location too. And as has been mentioned earlier, that's often the number one complaint that I've ever received is when you go into a business that's thinking about starting a recycling program, the first thing you hear is, we don't have room. No, the space is too expensive. You know what it costs per square foot for warehouse space? No, we're not going to allocate that to waste. So there's an argument that will always be brought up. But when you look at the successful companies that have amazing programs, you'll see collection containers in that expensive space. It is part of the company culture, and it's an investment, just like going out and buying a piece of equipment. And that's the final thing that companies might invest in is the infrastructure of densification, or typically it's densification, because every ton of waste that goes to the landfill, you pay, they call it a tipping fee at the landfill, roughly $30 a ton. But the transportation to get it there often is more expensive than the tipping fee. So the total cost of every ton could be $70. So every ton of waste that goes to the landfill, you're paying for the privilege to dispose in the landfill, plus the transportation cost of getting that there. You're paying for the fuel, you're paying for the labor of the driver, you're paying for the insurance and road taxes, all that stuff. So the best thing to do is not take it to the landfill if you want to save money. And then finally, those companies that are really stretching and trying to get to a zero waste goal of some kind, you know, not necessarily a commitment to actually make zero waste by a certain time, but a commitment to strive for zero waste. So it's the whole mental attitude of, we're gonna look for every opportunity to reduce waste. We may never get there, but we're looking for every opportunity to reduce our waste. So they will actually establish reduction goals. And they're done on a routine basis. I was just talking to Heidi. I think Steelcase is doing it every 3 years, setting goals. But some companies may set it every 5 years or every 1 year. But the important thing to look for is, are there performance goals? And the last thing that best of class companies do is they get independent verification that they're reaching their goals. So there are verification schemes out there, that a zero waste verification scheme, that I think most of them say that if you can verify that 99% of the waste that you generate is reclaimed somehow or taken to some kind of reclamation facility, then they'll give you a third-party independent certification that you've met that performance. So since Ken, I don't know how much time we have, Ken. Are we good?
Okay, time for questions now? I mean, you've got
Okay, yeah, I'm good at this point. Yes?
Are most of the limits to plastic recycling intrinsic to the material itself, or due to the disintegration of the players along the steps that are potentially possible?
Yeah, I'll share this with Heidi, but I would say both. The 70% of our of the materials that were being recycled in the U.S. were going to China. So when that policy came down saying we're not going to take any more of your, it was really contaminated. They said it has to be less than 1% contamination before we'll accept it, and none of the recycling facilities here in the U.S. could even come close to meeting that. So it was a shock, but at the same time, there is a lot of investment going on to start building up our internal U.S. or North American recycling capability. But the other side is that the resins itself, they all have different melt flow temperatures, they have different additives to it. So even if it says number 6 or number 3, that doesn't mean that it's going to perform the same way as all polyethylene or polypropylene would.
Can you actually subcategorize those or no? In other words,
So yeah, all plastics are different. Like, we use the word plastics pretty ubiquitously, and when we say that, everyone thinks like a plastic water bottle, but every type of plastic is different, obviously, and they all have their own different chemistries. So the recycling facilities now, I think, are going to start pushing back on the commingled culture that we've all developed. In the industry, it happened first, but it's going to start happening curbside too, I think, and that's just the direction that we're headed in. So for industry, we have to make sure that we're source separating. So if you have polypropylene chair back, then that polypropylene chair back goes in its own Gaylord separate, or box separate from your PET water bottles. Or so each different type of plastic should be source separated to make it easier for the recycling company to take that material, put it through a grinder, and then to melt it back down into another product.
are there actually subcategories, for example, of HDPE?
Yeah.
And is that relevant to
It
this
is.
problem?
There's an organization called the International Standards Organization, and they set standards for everything. They must have 50,000 different standards, but they do have a standard for the specific classification of plastics. Yes?
Electronic waste, what do companies do with that? Everybody's getting new computers and
Recycle.
chargers and whatnot.
So electronic waste is actually really easy to recycle because there's a lot of metals, precious metals in electronics. So most organizations, if they're doing the right thing by law, you're legally obligated to recycle electronics. It's part of a universal waste. So if it's not recycled, it's considered hazardous waste. So by law, industries are recycling electronic waste. Now, again, municipal recycling of electronic waste can be a little bit more challenging, but your local recycling facilities typically have electronic take-back programs. I don't know, do you know anything about?
And in our office, we have a lot of paper, but we also put everything on the computer, everything. And so in the office, there are about 8 very large garbage cans, locked with padlocks and with a narrow slot on top. All paper goes in there. And then Iron Mountain, I think is who we have, comes by. They empty them, and all the paper is shredded in the parking lot. And in addition, we use not bottled water, but we use water out of a Therafon. So we're trying. By law, all paper has to be shredded. So
Did that answer your question about electronic waste?
Yeah, I just had heard stories about computers going to India and just not being able to be recycled with all the different.
Regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, 10 years ago, there wasn't many options locally for electronic recycling, so a lot of it was going to Asia, or different parts of Asia. But there must be 3 or 4 local companies now right in this region that will do electronic recycling, so it becomes a lot more regional now.
It's not free though. It costs at a cost.
What about glass? Have you guys heard anything else about that coming back to the market? I mean, because we hear about that being such a opportunity for endless recycling or like multi-use recycling and things like that. And with the issues of plastics versus glass, you almost don't want to even buy glass products now at this point. So.
I'm sorry, did you say glass?
Glass.
Yeah.
It's worse.
Well, I don't know of anything local, but one of the projects that I've been involved in, you may have heard about, is Kent County has a regional landfill and a recycling facility, and they've adopted they're trying to reduce their waste going into the landfill 90% by 2030. And the way they're doing that is they've purchased land to expand the landfill behind the existing landfill, but they're decided to turn that into a recycling park. So they're going to try to attract recycling companies in so that the waste that would normally go to the landfill just go right behind it and go to this industrial park that will try to reclaim as much of that as possible. One of the companies that they've been investigating is a company that will take waste glass and turn it into an aggregate. So it can be used in road building and home building and so forth. Actually, believe it or not, in some parts of the U.S. there's an aggregate shortage. So this is kind of a replacement for that waste glass.
But I think in general, currently though, in current markets, glass is very hard to recycle. So it's actually worse than some plastics, unfortunately.
Any other question for maybe both Bill and Heidi? What are some of the examples of behavior change within an organization that you've had to implement or that you've experienced? I can think of a number of places where some places I either work at or been working with where we've taken away all their trash cans, put in the sorting centers, and it's like deer in the headlights the first time you tell people you took away their trash can. They're just totally panicked. But it's not hard once you have a recycling center nearby. So behavior changes that you found corporate-wide or Bill, you found in research?
Yeah, well, behavior change is culture, right? So, and that doesn't change overnight. For me, specifically with manufacturing, that culture is really hard to change. So what I focused on was the why. So, and I also had a lot of boots on the ground leadership. So actually getting out there on the plant floor and explaining to people why I wanted them to do what I wanted them to do with the shrink wrap. And then creating really good signage, visuals, and then making sure that your visuals in the sense that it's actually a picture rather than words, because we have different languages being spoken on the floor. So making sure that everyone understands what we're wanting them to do and why. Focusing on that why piece is really huge, because I think when people understand why you're asking them to do something different, they will buy in quicker than if you just are asking them to take up 5 more minutes of their tack time on the floor. So for me, it was boots on the ground leadership and focusing on that why messaging.
Well, this goes back, from my perspective, something that Carla said earlier, and that is, lost my train of thought. So. You said something very cogent earlier.
I can get out my notes.
I'll think of it.
We always had paper records in the securities business, and I entered that business back in 1983. And I used to do my own, what they called posting. And then after a while, I had assistants who did posting. And then after a while, we had rooms full. You know, it was like 30 feet by 30 feet, full of files. Everything got recycled. And all the paper got shredded. And all the paper, you know, was recycled after that. So it's been a big change in our industry, I think.
I'll try to recover. I'm going to be right back to you. Yeah, it's the educational component that the environmental activism, you know, isn't just a tree hugger kind of thing. I mean, if you start talking to folks, if they're hunters or fishers or whatever they are, you can make a direct connection that, you know, the waste that's going out of this plant or this business that ends up outside, blowing around, and getting into the environment is going to affect the quality of your outdoor experience at some point. So it's pretty easy to make the connection and get people on board once you really try. Yes, sir.
What percentage of the time is business scale recycling a positive cash flow event?
It was almost 100% of the time.
Yeah, it used to be 100%.
What, 6 or 7 years ago? But maybe 10% now? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're finding those weird, innovative solutions, but if you're just going to your local municipal recycler, I would say you'd probably be in the negatives, being that negative. If you're looking for those weird, funky outlets that we've had to explore, then we actually are in the positive still. But a lot of that is due to steel and aluminum. That really carries the weight of all the other commodities that have zero value. So if you have an innovative approach to it and you look at it as where I think I've heard Bill Gurn from Hayward say this a lot, and he's right. You know, sometimes you're going to be in the positives, sometimes you're going to be in the negatives, and sometimes you're going to be break even. But you know that it's the right thing to do, and you got to keep doing it no matter what.
Go ahead.
Heidi, I was curious if Steelcase has developed a take-back program for its products that it manufactures. You know, that concept of maintaining responsibility for the product, even after you sell it, but take it back when the customer's finished using it. But those kinds of programs and build, you know, too, that companies are taking that on more.
Yeah, 100%. So we have a program, it's called Phase 2, where we aren't physically taking back those materials, but we're helping the customer find solutions, end-of-life solutions. So whether that's donating to an organization like Habitat for Humanity, or donating to a local school or a local charity that needs those products. But yeah, we do work with any customer that's requesting take-back programs. And I know other companies, Herman Miller, for example, has a really great take-back program as well. So that's definitely part of the ESG conversation. It's part of sustainability conversations. And I think those types of programs, I know there's organizations like TerraCycle who are doing take-back programs for common consumer goods, like Haagen-Dazs, Nestle, has a take-back program through TerraCycle where they actually have a returnable ice cream container. So it's kind of cool. I think that's starting to trend, and we're going to see more and more of that.
Yeah, I think Goodwill here in Holland has a pilot program. They're working with some of the company, well, Dan, you can
Sure,
talk about
yeah.
it again.
Yeah, so Goodwill Industries, Dan Borsma, who worked for Herman Miller for 19 years, doing what Heidi does, they have a program, Dan's developed a program over a number of years there. They can actually, through Goodwill Industries, recycle, repurpose, recycle 90% of all office furniture. So they've been able to find mechanisms for that. It's harder right now, certainly harder, but Goodwill Industries does that. And usually it's at least break even, and many times it's less, and sometimes people make money on it. So it depends on what the product is, the take back. But it also takes the manufacturer encouraging the purchaser to have an end life or a next cycle. I have a couple of organizations that I've worked with where they got all new furniture and somebody forgot to ask the question, well, what happens to the old stuff? And it all just got landfilled until we identified it and went, oh, okay, let's ask the question up front. So if the manufacturer can also ask that question when they're selling something, the salesperson can ask, what is the life of the furniture you have? There's that opportunity to get it back in the cycle again. So it kind of takes both us thinking about it from the consumer side and the
100%.
manufacturer asking that on the other side just to encourage that.
Yeah, customers are driving the market right now. So investor communities are caring about ESG because customers are caring about ESG. And I think we're actually going to pilot a program with Dan very shortly here. So yeah, we're excited. He's got struggles. We all have struggles. There's no way that it's going to be 100% profitable or 100% recyclable. I think with modern materials, we're mixing more and more materials. We're mixing more and more plastics on top of each other, mixing more and more electronics on top of each other. So it's going to become more difficult, but I think to Bill's point, there's a lot of money being invested in recycling right now, and electronic and optic sorters and stuff like that for municipal recyclers. So what we're probably going to eventually see is a more federal level take back program where companies are going to actually have to invest in end of life management. So it's called producer responsibility. And I think that's probably the direction that the US is going to have to head, because the municipal recyclers can't support themselves economically for too much longer. So the companies who are making the consumer goods are going to have to help support them in some fashion.
Is there any, you have these business scale projects, so you have many employees that you've invested money in educating. Is there any possibility for a business to get a positive cash flow by since it's already trained these people, by providing receptacles that employees can deposit things from home in the businesses, trash thing, cutting the employees' waste costs perhaps, and increasing your ability to get income from the waste that's there?
So we're not making money off of it, but we currently have a program at Steelcase where we allow employees to bring in commingled recyclable materials, because we partner with the Kent County Materials Recycling Facility. And so people are able to bring in recyclable commodities from home who may not already be afforded that opportunity. We don't make any money on it. In fact, it's about a $50,000 to $70,000 cost to the company per year. But again, it's the right thing to do, so we do it. But yeah, luckily the Kent County recycling facility is still operable, but I think they're actually in the red right now too even. So I know in California they just closed 300 recycling facilities down in 2019. And so that's what I was saying earlier, not to scare people, but industries are feeling the burden right now, but I think eventually municipal curbside's going to feel it too. So that's why Steelcase feels like it's very important to keep that recyclable ability for our employees. And it extends to our retirement community too. Anyone who has ever worked for Steelcase can bring in materials.
I know our residential recycling is being redesigned right now, and possibly the elimination of the yellow bag and all that kind of thing. Are some of you folks involved in that directly, locally?
Both Bill and I are.
Okay. What is the status of that redesign of the system at the moment?
Sure. Do you want to, or you want me to?
Well, we can both pitch in. Well, they, I think the decision has been made, I think, to go away from the yellow bags to curbside carts. There's some data that shows that by doing that, you'll decrease the contamination that's been showing up in the yellow bags, and increase the volume of material that actually gets to the recycling center, because a lot of the yellow bags, a vast majority of the yellow bags, don't make it to the recycling facility, because when they get compacted by the truck, they rip and tear and all that stuff falls out, and it just becomes part of the general refuse at that point. So only bags that are intact are the ones that are taken out of the trash and recycled. So the cart system will solve that problem. They're thinking about every 2-week pickup. So you'll get, you can choose, I think, probably a 65-gallon or a 96-gallon roll-out cart, and they'll pick the recycling up once every 2 weeks, and the trash will still be picked up weekly.
It'll still be single,
Commingled.
Yeah, commingled.
What's the target for that to occur by?
I can, well, here, I'll
Go
give
ahead.
you a couple updates.
Mhm.
So it hasn't been formally approved by council yet. It's been presented to council at a study session. They've gotten the nod to go ahead and start renegotiating the contract, which they already had. So that has to be changed, because the contract says you have to use yellow bags, and there's a contract. So they're renegotiating that right now. And both parties are amenable to that. So it's not like a contentious contract. And so that's one part of it. So I think that's probably, I think it'll probably come up for a vote probably in the next 30 days or so. Nikki's here, one of our city council members. And then there are several grants, several state grants that are available that will pay for, one grant will probably pay for 80%, and then from another organization that partners with the state may pay for the other 20%. So we're talking about like a $500,000 investment for carts, so it's very big, but fortunately there are grants covering that. The grant cycle is the end of April is when it gets submitted. The education grant gets approved a little bit earlier. The cart grant doesn't get approved, we don't think, until probably August. So that's part of the rollout, is that has to be approved first, because we can't buy the carts and get reimbursed. It is they will help us pay for the carts. So there's a process there, steps.
Who will own those carts?
Well, the city will own them, because we're purchasing them, but they will be delivered to everyone's residence.
Just like
So
your
there's
trash
about
can.
Approximately 10,000 of them that are going in.
Are they using recycled plastics for the carts?
Well, it's very interesting. So we just had that conversation today.
Good.
That they're looking at an opportunity to take all of the old cans and reprocess them, repurpose them, and break them down and make the new cans out of it. So that was just from Cascade Engineering.
Good.
Was just talking about that. We just discussed that today.
Mhm.
So it's a great opportunity. It's a great story.
Mhm.
It's really, everything about it is really, really good. So that'll be a big part of it. I was gonna just mention one other thing about knowing what's in your waste stream and doing an audit.
Mhm.
It's extremely important. The one that the city undertook was literally, we were standing in your trash with our boots and our rubber gloves and sorting everything down to the smallest little details, photographing it, inventorying it, weighing it, documenting it, and then creating the reports from that. So that is extremely important, knowing what's in there. We've done it with, I personally have done it with 2 churches and with one of the schools, and the same thing came out of each one of them. Over 50% of what was in their waste was compostable. 50% of it. And then another 25% was probably recyclable. So if it's sorted properly and not contaminated, so that audit is like the first thing. You have to know what's in there before you can know what you have to do with it and how to process it. Let me go over here first.
This is off garbage and on investing. Carla, is there a good way to get these huge pension funds out of unsustainable investments?
Yeah. You have the sheet
Carla,
that
you're
I
good.
thought, oh yeah, that I thought was great. You know, you can talk to the HR person or the business financial manager at your company and say, you know, ask them the hard questions. How much of our pension funds are in energy like fossil fuel. Once you are a shareholder in any number of companies, you can certainly influence the company through your voting, through your appearance at a shareholder meeting, through writing letters. And there have been lots of examples in the past how even very old women, Ann Schreiber in her 90s, went to the shareholder meetings and she nabbed these CEOs and CFOs and COOs and asked them the hard questions, you know, what they thought, why they were doing what they did. And so there are things that can be done. It's something that a lot of us don't do. But there are things, yeah. And you had some good ideas. Thank you.
I'm just wondering, I mean, especially with furniture manufacturers in this area, wood has been called the poor man's plastic and was used for furniture for a very long time. It's a little plastic. So, and it locks up CO2 in a way that plastic doesn't. And it doesn't have to be taken out of the ground. In fact, it's an incentive to grow more trees. So, is there a role for furniture companies to reintroduce the preferential use of wood rather than plastic, and maybe find some new markets to replace less recyclable things with wood?
Yeah.
So ironically, wood is one of our hardest waste streams to find an outlet for, unfortunately.
Take it to a power plant.
We do take it all the way to Genesee County to incinerate for waste to energy. The problem with that is obviously the footprint of hauling all the way there. And they're the only approved facility in the Midwest. And they have a very short lifespan. The subsidies for waste to energy facilities are non-existent. So even though furniture industries, tire industries are very reliant upon waste to energy for a form of waste landfill diversion, they're not a part of a renewable energy portfolio. And so their lifespans are actually limited because the price of natural gas is so cheap. So they're in the same boat as our recycling facilities right now. It's kind of a perfect storm, unfortunately. But we're working with Bill on a lot of that.
Yeah, we've had a limited success with experimenting. We've actually ground up composite wood panels into a powder, mixed it with polylactic acid or a bio-based plastic, mixed it all up and extruded it into a filament and used that as a feedstock for 3D printing. And it does make a printed part. The qualities aren't great, so probably bioplastic might not be the best, but a nylon or something could work. And we found several companies that are using plastic injection to mix wood and plastic together, and they're making stackable chairs like this.
And that's all because you use these extruded or 3D mechanisms because the older styles of machining things and boring is prohibitively expensive.
And waste intensive.
Yeah.
You're taking stuff
It's
off
additive
as
manufacturing.
opposed to
rather
just adding what you
subtractive.
want.
But I think so a key point there. I think a key point that never gets made because a lot of people don't ever want to push back on customers. But a key point is if we didn't care so much about minor defects of what actual real wood looks like, I don't think we would have to add veneers or laminates or melamines on top of that to make it pretty. So I think there's a key point there for, like, even if you're buying a banana at the grocery store, right? We expect that banana to be bright yellow and perfect, but that's not sustainable. That's monocultured, right? Yeah, so I think there's this consumer piece to this conversation that really does need to be had, where we all need to start thinking differently about what we're purchasing, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to just, make sense economically.
Jen, you get the last question.
I'm just coming from an education perspective, and I'm hearing we need to have some thinking outside the boxes of what we can do with all of this recycling to make this into recyclable products, because it is just going into the landfill. And are there any programs being done to work with the millennials or kids in school that are really trying to get them to think and to explore ideas with your company. I know like the Ottawa Area ISD has a summer program where they work with groups of high school kids to come up with innovative solutions to problems of local industry. So I'm just thinking that might be.
Yeah, I'd love to get your card or information afterwards. Yeah, we work with colleges, and we through Bill's group, SRG, we work through a lot of higher level institutions. Currently working through Florida State, I believe, and we've tasked students there to try to figure out some sort of closed loop system for our plastics and our packaging. Whether that means that we develop a tote system similar to what we're asking our suppliers to do, or what does that look like? How can you help us figure out a solution to this problem? Because a lot of times we have a lot of hats in manufacturing. We're running 1 million miles a minute towards different directions. We don't have time to sit down and just brainstorm solutions to problems, but young people do, and they don't have the bureaucratic levels and layers that we all do, right? So they can think through some of those problems a little bit quicker than we can. So yes, we are, but I would love to get your information.
And I would point you to Kendall School of Art and Design. They have a design program there, and it's just embedded with sustainable design efforts. So a lot of young kids, I don't know about secondary or younger, but the college level, Kendall, and I can give you a name of Gail DeBron, who's the chair of that department.
Great. Carla, Heidi, Bill, thank you so much. Can I have a round of applause for is there a bigger closing remark? What would you like? What would you like to close it? Want to sing a song together? We're going to dance. We're going to dance. No, remember, we can stick around. I do have the ukulele in the car. I can bring it in. We can have a little sing along. So we can do it.
I think I'll go home.
Okay.
No, April 22nd, 50th anniversary of Earth Day.
Day.
50th. So just think of that 50 years. How many generations have been taught that recycling is the right thing to do? Yeah. Recycling is not going away. It's going to be more expensive in the short term, but where are our values? Long term, it's going to come back and it's going to be profitable.
It'll be better too, I think.
And it'll be better because there are 3 plastics recycling facilities just being built in the Great Lakes area. Paper mills that have been offline for years are starting to get reinvestment. So you're seeing the benefits of the problems that we experienced with China shutting everything off. We're depending on ourselves again instead of outsourcing.
Plus jobs. It's going to create jobs. So.
Great. Thank you so much.